Daily Western Short Stories. This is Coyote's Campfire Tales. Pull up a log. Tonight's tale begins now. This is a story about how I stepped down and white and cuffs clicked. The depot whistle screamed. The sheriff's tin star flashed, and the crowd hissed, "Bandit." A scar-faced rider clocked me, raked heels, and tore into red dust as the sky went vulture dark. I could still hear the cuffs in my bones when the sheriff shouldered me off the coach and across Basin Creek's platform, past trunks and hat boxes, and a vulture nailed like a shadow to the telegraph pole. Heat boiled off the rails. The depot smelled of creosote and hot iron. The clerk, ink on his thumbs, flipped a mail-order ledger the way a gambler fans cards. He found my name or near enough to it under a column marked brides and made a careful, pained sound. Same initials, he told the sheriff, as if letters were evidence. Same train. Traveling dress matches the notice we took, blue serge, bone buttons. He didn't look at me, only at the page, as if the page were truer. The deputy jittered beside us, tapping a brass key against his palm like a grasshopper in a jar. Every clang made the gawkers tighten like wire. A boy with freckles asked his ma if outlaws wore wedding shoes. A woman in a dusty lilac bustle said she'd always warned that ordering a wife by post invited trouble by freight. The sheriff's jaw worked slow, like he chewed gristle. He could neither swallow nor spit. "Trunk," he said. The deputy hauled it onto the baggage bench, sweat darkening his collar, and sprang the latch. My letters were tied with a blue ribbon. The hat box held my veil, folded neat. On top, from some unkind hand, lay a twin veil none of mine, a damp weight that smelled of creek water. The deputy raised his brows like a jury. 2 miles shy of noon, stage robbed by a veil-faced woman. The sheriff said without looking at me. He sounded like he was reading from a page no one else could see. Took the bank's payroll and a gentleman's watch. Left hoofprints hard south. The railroad bell clanged and sent shimmer down the track like spilled mercury. I thought of my real name and felt it dry to salt on my tongue. The telegraph chattered in the office like gossip behind a door. A fly worried the edge of the blotter. That was when the man stepped out of the sunstroke glare, broad-shouldered, hat brim weathered to a pale scar, eyes the color of far hills after rain. He didn't gawk. He measured Dot. The crowd spilled back, parting as if wind had come up. The sheriff's tin star threw a shard of light over the ledger's ruled lines. "You volunteering a cell?" he asked the man. "A house," the man said. "Under my roof she won't run. Post your deputy to my porch if it settles your supper." The deputy liked that notion a little too much. The key clicked twice against his thumb. "Protective custody by bond of marriage," the clerk murmured, already wetting his pen. I stood there in cuffs while they argued the shape of my fate like men haggling over a saddle. The man looked at me a long moment, not unkind, and said for the street to hear, "I'll take her home." The sheriff nodded once, and the clerk bent to the form. The neeb bled an ink blot that spread like a bruise. The deputy produced the brass key. The bite of the cuff eased, and the gawkers swung aside as if doors on a stage, letting us through into the blaze. The sheriff walked me off the platform into the office that did double duty as telegraph and jail. He set me in a chair with one short leg and let the deputy pace circles that squeaked the floorboards. The ledger lay open like scripture. The clerk traced my initials with a blunt nail and read them out for the room as if sound made letters truer. "Stage was robbed at noon by a veil-faced woman," the sheriff said, jaw muscle ticking. "Blue traveling dress, bone buttons, hat box in hand." The deputy's eyes lit at my hat box the way a wolf's do at a henhouse dot. I gave my account plain as fence posts. Deming to Cotton Draw, a water stop at Bitter Well, and a long, cursed delay outside Yuma, while a brakeman chased a loose freight. Cow off the rails. 2 hours, said the rancher from the doorway, voice easy but exact. Ask your wire. The telegraph key clicked like a witness clearing its throat. The clerk, eager to be useful, noted times in the ledger's margin. Noons when the stage got took, the deputy pressed, jitterbright. A woman in a veil stepped from chaparral, showed a pistol, took the payroll and a gentleman's watch and rode off south. Same dress, same ribbon, just like hers, the deputy said, pointing at me. He tapped the ledger as if it were a warrant. The deputy dug under the false bottom every traveling woman learns to build. His knuckles knew where to feel. He drew out a flat packet wrapped in butcher paper, Blue Eagle stamped neat the bank's script, crisp as Sunday. Look at that, he breathed, as if admiration could make it honest. Silence folded around us hard as a wall. The rancher didn't move. Witness says the robber splashed through Cold Spring Ford and broke brush dripping, he said. That. Packet's dry. He said it soft, but it landed. The sheriff cut his eyes toward me and then to the window, where heat trembled over the tracks. The wire chattered beyond the door like a nervous bird. Boot prints darkened the office boards, all pointing my direction, and I felt myself arranged inside them. The sheriff nodded at the hat box. The clerk lifted the lid slow, expecting a rattler. My veil lay on top, lavender and trunk dark. Beneath lay another same scallop, same stitched flower, a twin made to mislead. When I pinched a lace, cold crept into my fingers, as if water still clung to it. A bead fell and made a dark coin on the blotter before the air took it. The sheriff watched the droplet, not me. I saw the shape of a plan settling in the room, and it did not belong to me. We rode out with the sheriff's dust still on our boots. Basin Creek shrank to a brave row of fronts, pretending permanence against the Badlands. The rancher kept the horses in the lee of low hills, choosing cow paths that curved like careful thoughts. I watched his hands on the reins because they were steadier than mine. He hadn't told me more name than the clerk wrote, and I hadn't told him mine beyond what the wire could steal. The cuffs had left bracelets of ache, wind-combed. The grass had hissed in the yucca. A hawk rode the heat, and every time its shadow slid over us, I flinched like the gallows had moved. His place set apart, a square of house and barn carved out of red dirt and stubborn will. No curtains, no fancy. A well bucket creaked like an old man clearing his throat. Inside smelled of soap, saddle oil, and a loneliness that had learned its manners. He set coffee on the stove and a clean cup by my hand, without remarking on the hitch in my fingers. Through the window, heat blur melted the rimrock. A coyote stitched the horizon with a trot that said daylight was a kind of trespass. When the lamp caught with a soft bloom, I breathed for the first time since the depot. You aim to run? He asked, not unkind. With half the town watching? I said. He nodded at that like it proved something about me he'd already bet. On. After a while, when the quiet quit skittering and lay flat, he led me down a short hall. At the end, a door wore a keyed lock, polished bright by use. He turned the brass and opened on a room that felt like walking into a past he kept muzzled. Files, ledger books, a pasteboard box of circulars stamped with the Pinkerton eye. Dead moths lay folded under the lamp glass. Old glue sweetened the dust. On one wall hung maps stitched with thread red to mark a run of robberies, blue for cattle routes, black for graves no one got around to carving. You knew the scar-faced rider, I said. I could still feel how his stare at the depot weighed me like a sack bound for freight. The rancher nodded once, the smallest movement. "Put that mark on him over the Jornado one winter," he said. "We ran them 5 days. Snow like glass. Horses hollow. One of them took my brother's mount from under him and left him walking in ice. I traded a bullet for the saddle, not the man. He didn't dress the story with bravado. He said it there, straight as plank. They had a woman, then veiled sometimes schoolmarm neat. The papers drew her 6 ways and got all of them wrong." He touched the maps with his forefinger, Needles Pass east to Cold Spring Ford, then south toward Yuma, as if he could still feel ground under every mark. "Last spring I saw a second woman ride with them," he said. "Small seat. Hatbox tied. Wrong, like a man roped it who'd never cinched one for a lady. The gang shed skins, but the habit holds. Read the wires, borrow a name, cut a life to fit the disguise." He looked at me. "Your deputy fishes trunks like a man who knows. A false bottom by feel." He didn't flinch at bank script where a stranger would have to guess twice. Somewhere outside a neighbor struck a slow fiddle. Coyotes answered like a choir of knives. "What were you before the quiet?" I asked. He opened a drawer and laid a badge in the lamplight 6-pointed, worn to soft edges. He shut it again like a door he'd chosen not to walk through. "Hired tin," he said. "I liked the clean lines until they cut the wrong way." He sifted in the pasteboard box until his hand found a sheet the way a parson finds his place. By touch, dust plumed when he blew on it. The flame flared, fluttered, and steadied. Charcoal lines, bold and uncertain, both, the way a hand draws from a memory borrowed third hand. A woman in a traveling dress, bone buttons bright as stars, a veil thrown back just enough to hint at cheek and brow. The likeness tugged at me like a half-remembered tune. My stomach pitched slow as a wagon on ruts. The room seemed to slide a finger to the left, then right. At first light we rode back. I wore his coat. The sheriff met us on the boards, star-bright. "Pages," the rancher said. "And who turned them?" The depot clerk had combed himself innocent. The mail order ledger lay open. The rancher tapped the bride's column. "2 entries with her initials," he said, "a week apart. One to Basin Creek, one to a way station box no one rents." Ink told on the clerk the later line darker, town misspelled, a 9 written over a faint 3. My hat ribbons. Twin sat on his blotter. He slid a palm toward it, then away. "The gang reads your wire and borrows your book," the rancher said. "They'd pull a name with matching initials and build a rhyme veil, hat box, ribbon. When the true bride steps off, folks recognize the costume, not the woman." The clerk stared at ruled lines as if ink might absolve him. The telegraph key gossiped. Beyond the partition, the rancher cocked his head. "Yesterday noon," he murmured. "Bride arrived. Fits description." The sheriff's jaw ticked. "Who sent that?" "Origin reads your office." The wire stopped like a throat closing. We crossed to the sheriff's. Hooks on the wall. Cell. Evidence. Strongbox. Spare. 3 held iron. One was a pale oval rubbed into the wood. "Deputy?" the sheriff called. He came in 2 cheerful, palms damp. "Smith's got the spare," he said. Filed a tooth. His hand hovered near his belt where another ring ought to hang, then fell. The key ledger, another neat book, showed a fresh entry pretending age. "Steel wares," the deputy added, spinning his brass key once for show. I remembered thee. Bite it left and swallowed it down. Back at the depot, we turned the page with my name. My order line wore Corrections Town re-spelled. Arrival underlined hard. Beneath it, same initials, a second bride. Destination, a phantom box. Notes, hatbox blue ribbon. She never meant to marry, I said. Only to stand close enough your eyes would swear we matched. The rancher nodded. A skin to force on you. The sheriff tasted metal with his eyes. Who paid you to misletter a life? The rancher asked the clerk, mild as water. The clerk colored. His drawer stuck, then gave. Inside lay $2 silver and a torn telegram strip showing DEPU. He shut it fast. Dust lifted and settled. The sheriff kept his silence, and it weighed. Their clockwork's tidy, the rancher said. One woman robs the stage, one stands as decoy. An inside man places scrip, waits a spare veil, and tips the hour by wire. When the town's wound tight, the gang comes back to cut their partner loose. The sheriff's eyes went to the empty. Hook and back. Inside which badge, he said. Heat made the street wobble when we stepped out. Across the way the deputy laughed at nothing, then noticed me. His hand twitched near his belt, twice, the same tick he had when he spun the key. I didn't blink, he did. And in my head the empty hook kept swinging, though no wind moved. Dusk bled out of the Badlands slow, taking the color from everything but the heat. The ranch house held its breath. He had me shutter the east windows and lay a damp quilt over the kitchen table, in case a stray spark gets ideas. The windmill ticked like a wary heart. Coyotes went quiet. We felt them before we saw them, the way horses change their lungs when other horses move in the dark. Then the rim lit. Signal fires stepping the mesa's lip like beads. A lantern bobbed near the windbreak, went out, sprang up on the other side. Shadows from the barn stretched long, turning the corral rails to bars. The kitchen lamp glowed. I reached to trim it, and his hand wrapped my wrist. Not yet, he mouthed. The shot came clean through the lamp crack like winter splitting a tank, a star of glass snow, and blackness swallowing the little world the flame had been. We slid under the quilt-covered table and let the dark hold us while hooves and low voices counted windows. He moved with a purpose that looked like mercy. From behind the stove he drew a sack of pea gravel and 2 tin lanterns blackened on one pane. He threaded them on rawhide and tied it to the hay rake's handle. When I push, he whispered, you crawl to the bedroom, count to 50, then break the back latch. I wanted to argue, but his eyes said the plan had only one spare piece, and it wasn't him. He fed the rake into the yard so the clear panes faced open ground. The rawhide sang. The lantern swung figure eights. Light rolled like a patrol. Riders took the bait and poured fire into the moving glow. Muzzle flashes strobed white, 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 turning the place into still pictures. The gravel sack arced east and hit with a horsey clatter. 3 men lit that noise and hollered. I counted 37, 38, then a whisper at the kitchen window. She's in there, certain as a report, meant to please. The voice had Basin Creek in it. I broke the back latch, swallowed the night, and slid along the barn, where shadows lay in bars. He whistled then, low and mean, the note cowboys use when a steer tests a fence. At the well crank he swung the lantern rig with one hand and carried a shovel in the other so his shadow multiplied him. They didn't. Like that math, 2 riders peeled for the rim. One fired at the moving light and spooked his mount. The circle stretched thin as a lariat, and one by one let go. Hooves faded toward the signal fires until only the windmill's tick remained. They know the yard, he said. Which window is kitchen? How the back latch sits. Which, says someone told them, I answered. Wire or badge, he said. And the wire ain't that quick without a hand to carry it. We saddled by feel and rode for Basin Creek under a moon dull as tin. The sheriff's place crouched by the telegraph. Front window dark, back hallway leaking a filament of candle. At the deputy's door I bent to the keyhole. My veil lay on. His chair smoothed as if a woman had just sat there. The candle behind it made the lace a false halo and made a liar of his eyes. We didn't knock on the deputy's door. The sheriff looked at the slit of candle and at my veil draped on the chair like a promise the wrong mouth had made. He closed his fist, opened it, weighed two kinds of courage. "You want proof or bodies?" the rancher asked him. The sheriff swallowed the answer and made coffee, like decency could hold the night together. When the cups were half gone, he said to the window, "Noon, Main Street. Vows." The words sounded like iron dot. We spread the plan on the clerk's blotter. Careful, as men setting nitro on a plank. The sheriff would read vows from the courthouse steps, so every badge and false badge could see his hands. The telegrapher would accidentally tap public vows at noon and fidget with his file, so the eavesdropper trusted the leak. Two steady deputies, left-eyed, left-handed, would crouch in the livery loft with scatterguns waiting on a dropped handkerchief. The bank man would mark faces who flinched at the word payroll. "What about the inside hand?" I asked. "You want him close when the truth goes loud," the rancher said. "Men show their truest faces when they think their plan is almost done." The sheriff's jaw ticked. "He rides beside me till noon. If he runs, the town will watch the direction." I palmed the blotter, paper cool as creekstone. "Then give me back my name." The rancher shook his head once. "Not yet. Let them choke on the one they forged." When the sheriff went to post notices, the rancher took me to his locked room and turned the brass slow. He opened the drawer where the badge slept, dull as an old coin. "I wore tin over my heart and thought it kept my heart right," he said. "I hunted a payroll thief into snow and found him burning banknotes to warm a baby pulled from a busted coach. He froze his fingers before he'd let that child cry. I brought him in anyway." The bank blessed me. His hands never healed. "That's why I live quiet. I didn't have a ring to give him, and he didn't ask. I slept in a chair with my head against the door, dreaming of bells that were only spurs. At dawn, the sheriff's wife came with pins and a sprig of dried yarrow she fastened near my shoulder. "For nerve," she said. "If you turn and run, I'll hold the way open." If I run, I told her, they'll only find some other woman to wear this veil. Wither passed across her face, a small nod, a smaller mercy dot by noon heat. Hammered the false fronts till they looked like scenery pretty flat, one shove from ruin. The sheriff mounted the courthouse steps. The deputy stood an elbow's length away, cheerful as a salesman, hands too visible, eyes too busy. Children pushed forward for a look. Someone tuned a squeeze box to a hymn that couldn't pick a side. The livery loft kept its secrets. The rancher's hand found mine steady, warm, then fell to his belt like nothing had happened. The sheriff began. His warrant voice had its edges sanded down till it almost passed for mercy. "Do you? He?" asked the rancher. "I do," the rancher said, like setting a board true even when your hands shake. "Do you?" the sheriff asked me. For one clean second I thought about saying my real name into open air and letting it stand under the sun where no ledger could erase it. The rancher's whisper slid under my veil. "Not yet." I swallowed the syllables others had tried to steal and kept faith with the plan. Faces pressed close, curious, cruel, kind, bored an audience, pretending to be a congregation. Back by the bell tower a shadow leaned wrong and made my skin prickle. When the sheriff lifted his hand for the last words, his star spat a dot of sun that stung my eyes. The ring the rancher offered was plain, warm from his pocket. It struck me strange to feel safest in the most dangerous place. I set my mouth and answered. The pistol came up like a thought someone else finished. Son slid the barrel. The crowd inhaled. The deputy's smile widened. "Easy, partner," the woman said, not to me. Her eyes cut to him. The courthouse bell spoke one, too slow. The rancher squeezed my fingers and let go. I lifted my veil with my left and snapped the pins with my right. I flung it into noon so the lace flashed white. Her aim drifted. I set the veil between us as a blind. Her shot chewed the cornice, up by. The bellish shadow leaned wrong. Scarface had climbed the stair. He crouched at the rope, sighting to cut the vows. I spat a word the rancher knew was his. He turned and went not for the woman, but for the deputy. They hit hard. A glint at his belt keys. "Hold your iron," the sheriff called to the loft. "Not yet." He stepped off the riser and palmed. His holster, he had picked aside. "Deputy," he said, "you got something to say?" The woman answered, "He keeps my wires in his pillow tick, and my money in his boot heel." "Don't you, partner?" She swung the muzzle toward the tangle. I hauled the bell rope. The clapper slammed bronze. Sound fell like iron rain. Scarface's shot rang wide. In the same breath, the sheriff dropped a white handkerchief. The loft spoke. 2 doors slammed. Pellets chewed dust by her boots. The rancher pinned his elbows. He fights to hold, not to ruin. The deputy twisted like a fox in wire. "He'll cut you a path," the woman promised him, tipping her chin toward the tower. Scarface slid to flank the bell, hunting a clean line. I snatched the veil from a hitching post and tossed it higher. Sun burned through. I turned to a blur. She fired at the blur. Lace hissed past my ear. I drove in and knocked her wrist. So the pistol kissed plank. Behind us the sheriff toe-kicked the keys to the clerk. "Lock my door. Bring the ledger." The clerk ran. Scarface came down slow, muzzle lowered. The crowd remembered to breathe. Up close her veil showed cheap stitch. Border flowers wrong for any store around. Her eyes were steady, insolent. "Don't," I told her, meaning more than the trigger. "You're wearing a life that doesn't fit." She smiled. "Fits fine on a poster," she said. "Ask your husband." I pulled the veil. It gave like paper surrendering a lie. Hat pins pinged. Black hair spilled, and a face stepped into air ink under the nails. Powder ghosting freckles, jaw set like the letter tray in her father's office. Not a gambler's wife, not a stranger. Basin Creek's own, the postmaster's daughter. The deputy stiffened under the rancher's weight as her name rose on murmurs. The sheriff's wife moved like a prayer said right. She came from the crowd, took the pistol from that loosened hand like bread from an oven, and set it on the courthouse step. Scarface lifted empty palms. I held the woman's hair because truth needed holding. The sheriff looked down at his man, then at me. "That'll do," he said to the town, to himself, to the story the gang tried to write over mine. The bell still trembled when the sheriff took the deputy by the wrist like a father catching a boy at a card cheat and clicked irons over the tremor. Dust hung in noon stripes. The postmaster's daughter looked smaller without the veil, ink, ground into her cuticles like confession you couldn't scrub. "Ledger," the sheriff told the clerk. The book arrived like a Bible at a bedside. She didn't wait for swearing. She told it plain. How she'd stood in her father's office reading wires as if they were neighbors' windows. How she'd bribed the depot clerk to misletter my town and double my initials. How she'd rode a spare veil through cold spring, Ford, and laid it in my hat box while the deputy minded evidence. She said partner. Again when she said deputy, and the way her mouth shaped it was half prayer, half curse. The crowd made a sound I'd heard once when a horse wet through a rotten plank and kept going pain and relief in the same breath. Scarface slid back against the bell tower with his palms idle, eyes traveling for an edge and finding none. The loft men held their scatterguns like old men hold hymns. The sheriff had the deputy empty his boot heel, 3 folded 10s like dried. Leaves a sliver of telegram tape with my initials, and a little brass blank filed to a key's tooth. The sheriff's jaw worked like a man chewing iron. "I own what I missed," he said, voice rough enough to sand wood. "And what I near hung you for." He looked at me a long 2 heartbeats, then at the rope coiled under the courthouse eave. Wind fussed it so it whispered. I felt its dead weight without touching it, and then, for the first time that day, felt it let me go. We spent the rest of the day in rooms that smelled of ink and sweat and slow anger. The clerk wrote the daughter's words into the margin. No one could erase. The sheriff wired Yuma for warrants with his star, turned a little sideways on his vest, like it needed to apologize too. Scarface chose the absence of a cell melted into afternoon when the crowd blinked so the loft men brought back only the echo of his boots. The deputy sat in irons and worked his tongue at the inside of his cheek as if he might worry a story loose between tooth and lip. He didn't. When the sun tipped, the sheriff's wife set a cup before me and pinned my veil back with the same yarrow she'd brought that morning. "You walk home under your own name," she said. "Speak it if you want, or keep it in your pocket till it's yours again." I checked its weight on my tongue and let it stay there small, private, warm. We stepped past the gallows yard at dusk. The beam threw a long plank shadow over the dust, the rope a line a man could trip on if he didn't pick his feet up. Wind went through it and made a sound like someone exhaling who'd held a breath too long. The rancher stood with his hat in his hand and one shoulder against nothing, as if leaning on an old memory. "You're clear," he said. It wasn't a prize. It was a door he was holding open. I looked at the ring the sheriff had made true by law and at the fingers that had offered it steady when everything else shook. "You said I do so I could keep breathing," I told him. "A kindness isn't the same as a vow." He smiled with the corner of his mouth that got used less and nodded like he respected a fence that said no entry. "Then we'll set a new post when you're ready," he said. "Or we'll leave the field open. I can live with both." Night came on with crickets and the kind of tired that lets truths speak. We rode out just far enough that Basin Creek's lamps were a string of embers and the courthouse bell was only the memory of weight. On a little ridge we sat our horses and didn't touch. Heat left the rock slow. In the quiet I told him my real name. He said it once and didn't try it again, like a man who knows a precious thing can be bruised by repetition. Down in town, the telegraph began its nervous clacking, spilling the story into places where people would turn it into talk and talk into judgment and judgment into forgetting. He handed me a letter the clerk had kept for me, sealed in red wax that had smooshed like a thumbprint. "Came while we were counting damages," the clerk had said, uneasy. The postmark read Yuma. The wax tasted of dust when I worried it with my nail. My hands were clean, but they still shook like the sound stuck in the bell. I opened it under moonlight that made the paper the color of bone. The hand was neat. The words stood straight like men on payday. There wasn't much to it. Enough. My chest went cold the way creek water makes a ring under clothes that never dries where you want it to. The rancher leaned, not touching, the way you stand near a skittish horse. He waited. "What's it say?" he asked, and I almost laughed because for a breath I was back on the platform, letters lined up neat and cruel in other men's hands. "It says I told him we were right to keep me a secret." Then I read it aloud so the Badlands could hold it with us, and not just me. Your husband stole something of mine. I'm coming. Thanks for riding with Coyote's Campfire Tailies. Stay by the fire and pick your next story.